The question is the Nikon Zf good enough for wildlife video and birding? Let me try and answer that question in this episode of Frames TM. This is not the heaviest of lenses. This is 1:600 Nikon Z mount lens. This is about 2 kilos and plus some. But this is large enough lens, heavy enough lens if you're going to handle and shoot for more than a couple of hours. So the first thing that one needs to take care of is whether it is comfortable to use the kit that you're going to use for birding and wildlife. The Nikon Zf is essentially a flat camera. I have the small rig grip mounted on the camera here, so it gives me a little bit more ability to grab onto something. But having said that, it is not a chunky grip, not like the Z8. For me, the major difference, the major challenge was the lack of custom buttons. I think I would have liked a couple more custom buttons to for me to be able to shift between different autofocus styles, autofocus boxes, and also to quickly change my white balance, things like that. Also, if I quickly want to increase or decrease my number of frames per second, even for that, I don't have a quick button to access that quickly. On your Fuji cameras, if you look at Fuji cameras like X-T3, X-T5, you'll actually see a lever that will allow you to quickly move to a higher frame rate. So on the ZF, I miss that. Having said that, for a $2,000 camera, for a camera of this style, the capability in this camera is astounding. First of all, the image quality is fantastic.
Back home, when I went through the files, I saw that ISOs as high as 2500 is absolutely no problem at all while editing, especially if you do not have to crop much. So that's one big thing. You can go up to ISO 4000, 3200, not a big problem. But if you start cropping, you may start seeing some of the grains appear on your final output, JPEG output. But if you don't have to crop much, if your frame rate right, no problem at all. The raw colors are really nice to edit. The files are so malleable. That's the thing. The colors are so rich and malleable, and I see this difference between the Z6II and the ZF files. There's a distinct difference, and I see that especially when you're shooting wildlife or birding, there is quite a bit of contrast to handle. And when you're trying to handle the dynamic range through post-processing, you may just end up getting bad colors. But with the ZF, I didn't see that. You can see the colors are excellent. They're very easy to handle in post. So there's a lot of detail to recover from the shadows, which is another fantastic thing. Now, this particular image is actually taken as was taken handheld at 1/40th of a second. So oh my God, it's fascinating. Right, the IBIS, it means IBIS is absolutely fantastic. You can counter the relatively slow speed of a lens like an f6.3 lens by lowering the shutter speed to as low as 1/40th of a second, and I was shooting at 600 mil. So that's something to really think about. I think this is I don't know if at any point in history this was actually possible, but it is possible now. Just lower the shutter speed to take the shot of a tired bird at the end of the day, relatively static, and you can still get the shot with 1/40th of a second shutter speed. Overall, on a budget telephoto lens like the 180-600, you can get some really cool shots with nice background bokeh if you take low angle shots and manage your angles well. And you will get this nice, well-rendered, beautiful pictures. Classy Nikon look out of these lenses.
One more thing about experience of this camera with any lens like any long lens like the 180 and 600 is that the balance, although this is a 700 gram camera, it kind of tilts forward a lot. That's going to happen with any wildlife setup. You have to use the left hand and try and support the entire rig. But I think what is important is to understand that that disbalances more, so you'll feel that more on a camera like this. The autofocus is almost as good as the Z8. Yes, uh, as things get more challenging, you will see that the Z8 or the Z9 will keep doing better, and cameras like the ZF will sort of fall behind. But for most situations, this camera is good enough, especially when you're trying to detect a subject and try and sort of grab hold of it and shoot continuously. There are situations where I could actually detect the bird through leaves and through foliage, and it was, for me, honestly, all right.
Back in the studio again. Now, let's talk about the autofocus in more detail. The autofocus is just, in my mind, is just intuitive. Many times it felt like it knew where it needed to focus. Finding the eye, even on a very dark head of that bird, was easy for the camera. And when you actually intended to shift focus, when the time was right, it just knew where to look at and where to focus. Spotting a small subject far away in the background was not a problem. Far away subject is not a problem. A small subject is not a problem. Again, in extremely busy situations when there's a lot of branches and trees and the bird is sort of sitting in between all these branches, flowers, leaves, and trees, it can spot the animal, the bird, through all that clutter and just find where to focus. That is amazing. And I found that at this stage, with these things, I found absolutely no difference between the Z8 and the ZF. However, it was in just two situations where I found a difference. The first situation was when there was a low contrast situation. For example, look at this bird. The color of the bird is quite a dark feathered bird, and if you see, the background is dark as well, and in such low contrast situations the camera will take a bit more time than usual to actually focus. At times it finds focus, and as you're about to take the shot, maybe it loses focus and goes to the background. It does that back and forth at times. Also understand that this was a low light scenario and ISO was quite high, my shutter speed was low. So already it was like almost 6 p.m. here, no, almost 6 p.m., 5:30-ish during winter time here. So it's quite a bit of low light under the trees in the shade. So you understand the situation was difficult already. And then there was low contrast situation, but it took a bit of time. It struggled a bit for a moment there. The other situation where I thought that this particular camera lens combination, because I also understand I'm not using the 400 here, I'm not using the 800 6.3 or the 100 to 400 or the 400 prime. I'm using the 180 to 600. It is the most affordable entry level telephoto wildlife birding zoom lenses available on the mount. And with that, honestly, even with the Z8, it wasn't the best performer when it comes to autofocus particularly, but for the price quality, if you look at the price quality combination, it's a fantastic lens, but it is definitely not the best lens that's there for the Z mount. So keep that in mind. And when I was shooting these birds that were flying away, and also the skill level is important. I'm not a very skilled bird shooter, so remember that as well. But comparing these setups side by side, I can say that relatively when it came to birds in flight, there was a bit more struggle with this setup than other situations. So but then it eventually I was able to focus on a few birds when there was adequate time, and I was when I was able to kind of put the point of camera at the right area in the right time, and just ensure that I am ready as a photographer to be able to take the shot. I think the camera did well. It just didn't feel as good as the 800, as good as the Z8, let's say, and with the 800 PF or the 400 2.8. I mean, that's understandable. But given all of this context and all of this, I can very easily say that it is fair to say that the ZF is a very capable wildlife and birding camera, if you know what lens to use this with. And I think the lens to use this with is not 180 to 600. Possibly, I think I have three lenses in mind. It's the 400 4.5, it's the 100 to 400, and the 600 6.3. those are the three lenses because they're more manageable, they're lighter, you can just be more mobile, especially with that kind of a setup. Oh, I forgot to bring the ZF here. I just want to show you what a lovely little camera and how capable this camera is. The question is yes. The question is answered. Yes, the ZF can do birding. And if it can do birding, it can definitely do wildlife. Let me tell you that, because I think when it comes to autofocusing, when it comes to speed of movement, the abruptness of movement, all of those, if you consider those elements, I think birding is more difficult than larger animals. So therefore, I think it is a very, very capable birding and wildlife camera, and I have no doubt about that. Of course, the camera does not have, the shutter is not very quiet. It's not as quiet as, let's say, the XT5 or even the, Z6 II. Even the Z6 II had a slightly softer shutter than the ZF, but for the kind of camera it is, I like that clunky mechanical sounding shutter. It's just that when you're shooting birds, maybe at times you may be aware of the sound you're making through the shutter clicks every time. So I was just a bit aware of that when I was shooting, and the Z8 was absolutely like beautiful when it came to that. I also recently shot with the XT5 and this 150 to 600. It's such a light, wonderful lens, only 1.5 kilos or 1.6 kilos, very, very manageable lens. And this is a very similar setup to the ZF with the telephoto lens, although this lens is actually about some 700 or 800 grams lighter. So if you are curious about how the XT5 does with this 100 to 600, 150 to 600, look forward to this video. It's going to come in the next 7 to 10 days. I have quite a few telephoto lens reviews lined up. I'm also going to talk about the 800 6.3 and my experience with that lens. So a lot of exciting stuff. If you like this video, subscribe, support the channel. Let me reach 5,000 subscribers first, and then maybe possibly, if 2024 can be a good year with your blessings, I would like to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year. I'm going to see you soon with another one soon.